As we wind down from another week of free agency in the offseason, the Carolina Hurricanes, but mainly the Chicago Wolves, have been adding some names to shore up the roster for the 25-26 season. Some returning faces come back to the fold, and there's even some new ones joining the roster as they get ready for next season. All of that and more on a Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes.
You're Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everyday for making this your first listen of the day, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin. I'm the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hockeyers, also the co-host of the Searchcast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all of my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. On today's show, we're mainly going to be talking about a lot of the new recent signings that have joined the organization, maybe not some with the Hurricanes themselves, but shoring up some depth in the AHL for the Chicago Wolves. Like I said, got some familiar faces coming back into the organization. There's even a couple of the new ones that are joining the team, so a lot of exciting stuff going on, at least in all levels so far of the NHL and the AHL in terms of the Hurricanes organization. But before we jump into all that, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, today we're going to talk about the signings of Skyler, Brind'Amour, Domenik, Fenore, Noel Gunler, Gavin Bayreuther, and Tyler Weiss, and possibly some other things that are going on with the Hurricanes, but those are the guys we're going to be talking about and what we could potentially see for them this upcoming season for at least the Chicago Wolves and maybe somewhere down the line if the Hurricanes do clinch early and some of these guys get some NHL experience. So we're going to start off with Brind'Amour and Fenore here in segment one, and going to start with more so Skyler. Brind'Amour, he will be back with the Hurricanes organization in a 1-year, 2-way contract with his NHL level of his salary being $775,000 and then $90,000 in the AHL and is guaranteed $100,000. Now, Brind'Amour did make his NHL debut last season with the Hurricanes, getting his first goal of his career against the Ottawa Senators back on April 17th. But in 68 games with the Wolves last year, he did have 16 goals and 24 points, was third on the club in goals, and he was actually second on the team in shorthanded markers with 2. So not bad, all things considered, where, surprise, surprise, a Brind'Amour knows how to score shorthanded. Tell me if you've heard that story before. But it's very cool to see the fact that you get Skyler Brind'Amour back, and you know what he can do in terms of being that good shutdown defensive center, guy who can win a lot of faceoffs. And I know he was a very big key asset to the Wolves last season as they made it to the Calder Cup Playoffs for the first time after missing a couple of seasons. So you're bringing back a depth center that can really help out the team. And that's kind of where the Hurricanes need some help right now, because in terms of what their actual center group is right now, the guys that are technically signed to the team that are centers are Justin Robidas and Skyler Brind'Amour, and that's pretty much about it. Robidaw's on the last year of ZLC as a right shot center, and Brind'Amour as a left shot center. And that's kind of about it right now. Technically, Ryan Suzuki is still with the club because he is an RFA with ARB rights, so they're still waiting to figure out. But even with Ryan Suzuki coming back, technically in terms of the organizational signings that the Hurricanes kind of control, even with Suzuki signing, that's only put some 3 centers on the roster in terms of guys that can play that position in terms of what the Hurricanes need to control. Now, obviously, the Wolves are signing their own guys as well. That's not really going to be effective to the Hurricanes because, they're going to have to figure out their own roster situation as well. But that's what you're looking at with Brind'Amour. You're bringing him in to join Justin Robidas, kind of like your center core. You got your left in Brind'Amour, right in Robidas. That's kind of where it's looking at right now. So I know it's not a big needle mover in terms of the Hurricanes, but it still gives them some organizational depth in case injuries and stuff happen. If they need to bring someone up, there is a potential name there. And the fact that Brind'Amour does have a lot of AHL experience over his, kind of short career right now, 122 career AHL games, So he's got 19 goals, 32 points over that span when it comes to all of that. And of course, we all remember how good he was with Quinnipiac in the NCAA. Was the AC Defensive Player of the Year in 22-23, made the third team All-Star group, and also, of course, did win the national championship in 22-23. Now, the other player that got signed on the same day, and of course coming back, is Domenik Fenore, also a 1 year two-way, with him getting $775,000 in the NHL or $70,000 in the American Hockey League, and he is guaranteed at least $100,000, just like Brind'Amour. Now, he just finished up his second professional season last year, also making his debut for the Hurricanes against the Montreal Canadiens on April 16th, just like Brind'Amour, and did appear in 2 games. Now, he does have 9 goals in 32 points in 67 games, which was second among the team in defensemen, in goals, assists, and points last year. And he also led the team in 3 shorthanded goals, and also was the top defenseman with power play goals last year with 4. So not bad, all things considered. You're bringing back Domenik Fenore to the fold as well to help kind of build that blue line. Because right now, in terms of what the Hurricanes have in their signed blue line guys, Joel Nystrom, Charles Alexis Legault, Bryce Montgomery, Dominik Brind'Amour, Alexei Himosami. Of course, we're going to talk about Gavin Bayreuther later on in the show. And then Domenik Fenore is back. Ronan Seeley is still technically with the team as well, because he's also an RFA, but he's not an R-Bright eligible, but he's a restricted free agent. And that's just in terms of contracts that the Hurricanes do control. Of course, Bryce Montgomery spent some time with the Bloomington Bison, of course, now with the Greensboro Gargoyles. We're going to see how that works out. Of course, Dominik Brind'Amour kind of, being overseas, what's that going to mean with, what's going to happen with him as well. So even with the fact that the Hurricanes are still trying to figure out their defense as well, because Ty Smith is going over to the KHL, and of course they've added some guys into the fold as well in terms of NHL roster with Mike Riley and all of them. Bringing back Fenore is a good move. It's a really good defenseman as you're bringing back to the core group as overall. And of course, like I said, you already talked about guys that are already with the team, and adding also some names as well, because Scott Morrow is now a New York Rangers, so they're having to bring outside guys in that they think, okay, this is someone that we could use probably later down the road if injuries and stuff happen, or just need some organizational depth on the defense. Because right now, like Joel Nystrom's a right shot, along with Legault, Montgomery, Brind'Amour, and Himosami. Domenik Fenore joins him and Gavin Bayreuther are the only 2 left shot defensemen as of right now in the non-roster defense of 7 guys, and that's even including Ronan Seeley, who, once he is signed and does come back, he will be another left shot as well. So that's kind of what you're looking at. You're kind of shoring up that left side because you have a lot of right shot defensemen. Of course, probably not all these guys are going to be in the AHL. There might be some going to be in Greensboro or overseas, or however that works out in terms of just their contracts and all of that stuff that works out. But that's kind of what you're looking at right now. You're bringing Brind'Amour back as a depth center piece to help, the Chicago Wolves, because he did well for them last year. You're bringing back a shutdown guy on your center core, penalty kill, stuff like that. And then you're bringing Domenik Fenore back to kind of help shore up the blue line and help them guide them along. As, like I said, the Wolves are looking for their second consecutive Calder Cup playoff appearance under Cam Abbott and his staff. And, of course, with Spires Anastas coming back, as their defensive coach as well, who did really well with those guys last year. I'm excited to see what Anastasios does with them in terms of their blue line core and all that stuff as they get ready for hopefully another run next year. But so far, those are the first kind of like 2 big ones that kind of happen. I know we got a couple others we get to talk about as well later on the show. And of course, in the last segment, we'll talk about a Raleigh native coming back to the fold as well. But like I said, I know it's not huge moves in terms of the Hurricanes roster, but organizationally, you definitely need to get some guys for depth, moves and getting your AHL team ready to go. Because guess while you want to develop them, you also want to win as well. I think bringing these guys back will definitely help, as they were big contributors to the Wolves last season. That said, another big contributor comes back in Noel Gunler, and they add in Gavin Bayreuther. So stick around. We'll talk about those guys here in a second on a Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. We've all been there, logging on early, waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. Tired of the endless scrolling trying to find the best deal? Well, Game Time Zone Deals pick the best seats in your section for you. With Game Time, the price you see is the price you pay. No hidden fees. So take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. Now, we talked about Skyler, Brind'Amour, we talked about Domenik, Fenore, but there's other guys that even were signed before them that we got to talk about, as well as they are bringing back Noel Gunler and also adding a defenseman, Gavin Bayreuther, both also on one-year, two-way deals. Gunler's deal is $813,075 in the NHL level, or $80,000 in the American Hockey League. And Gunler's coming back after recording 13 goals and 26 points last year in 58 games for the Chicago Wolves, and he was actually second on the team in power play goals with 6, and was also even tied for 4th in goals as well. Now, in his full 3 seasons with the Chicago Wolves at 100 career games, he does have 24 goals and 49 points, and bringing back the 23-year-old is going to be, like I said, another one of those moves where you feel pretty good if you're the Carolina Hurricanes, the fact that you're adding more to the organizational depth of the team, because the fact you got Bradley Nadeau, Gleb Tricksoff, and you also got Noel Gunler, and then Felix Unger-Sorm. You kind of got your wingers kind of all set, another right shot guy as well, because Gleb Tricksoff's considered a left winger, shoots right. Nadeau is a winger, also center plate, shoots right. Robidas also shoots right as a center. Gunler's a right shot, and Felix Unger-Sorm is a right shot winger as well. So you kind of have your right wing almost set up, at least for the top 3, when you're talking probably Nadeau, Gunler, and Unger-Sorm, or if they think that they feel pretty good about having Bradley Nadeau on the left side, they can do that too. But you still are in a good spot overall. The fact that you're bringing a guy like Gunler back, who did pretty well things to serve the Chicago Wolves, and that you're just adding him in there as well. In this fact, too, is that he is a guy who's done pretty well so far in the, international stage when it comes to playing for Sweden, of course, 2017 under-17 team challenge, and then also the 2021 U20 World Championships. Of course, he was a 41st overall selection by the Hurricanes back in the 2020 draft, and someone who did pretty well, all things considered, even in Sweden, 56 points with 28 goals, being in 151 Swedish Hockey League games with Lula HF and Brynäs as well. So another great addition to the Hurricanes if you're looking at someone who's going to fit the wing depth as well. And of course, a guy who could potentially one day see some time for the Hurricanes, depending on how all things play out. But, the points aren't – you're hoping to see more development out of him when it comes to playing in Chicago. But I think with the young core that they have, like I said, when you look at a group that has Nadeau, Tricksoff, Robidas, Unger-Sorm as well, you're talking about guys who are 20, 22, 23, and then Unger-Sorm is 19. Even Skyler Brind'Amour is 25, and Josiah Slavin, the captain, is 26. And you're bringing back Juha Jaska as 27. So for the most part, Jaska is the oldest guy in the entire forward core, and everyone else is either 26, 25, and then low 20s, and even with Unger-Sorm being 19. So a good young core up front when it comes to the Carolina Hurricanes. Like I said, you're bringing Gunler back. Good move there. Someone that you can really use on the power play and kind of being in your top 6, or however you want to figure that out when it comes to that. Now, the other guy they did out, like I said, is Gavin Bayreuther, and Bayreuther's contract is $775,000 in the AHL, or $140,000 in the American Hockey League, with a guarantee of at least $150,000. Now, last year, Bayreuther did play with Lausanne HC in the National League, which was in Switzerland, scoring 5 goals and having 23 points in 52 regular season games. And of course, in the playoffs with them, he did have 2 goals and 8 points as they went on to go to the championship series, but did eventually lose to ZSC Lions in 5 games. But the thing with Bayreuther is he does bring some NHL experience to his resume. 122 career games between Dallas and Columbus, having 5 goals and 28 points. And then if you look at his AHL career as well, which spans over 238 games, that is with the Texas Stars and the Cleveland Monsters, scoring 25 goals and 117 points. And even if you want to look back at his NCAA career at St. Lawrence, where he played for 4 years, 35 goals and 111 points in 142 games with some personal accolades. How about NCAA's second All-American team honors in 2016 and 17? Now, adding him to the fold, we talked about a little while ago with the fact that they brought back Domenik Fenore. Gavin Bayreuther is 31 years old, is a left shot defenseman. In terms of the entire non-roster defense, which basically is talking about guys that the Hurricanes control their contracts in the American Hockey League, Bayreuther is the oldest guy, 31. Everyone else is 23 or younger. So Bayreuther is probably the seasoned vet out of those guys. Like I said, you got him for 1 year. He'll be UFA at the end of the season, but you're bringing in someone who's got a lot of NHL experience and most definitely a lot of AHL experience as well. So a good, we would say probably the leader of the defense core, which is, like I said, a lot of young guys who are 23 and younger. You're bringing in Bayreuther's 31, been there, done that, did really well back in Switzerland last season, comes back to North America, and is going to be your, top, probably one of your leaders of the defense guy. You'll probably see mostly playing a lot in the top 6 of the defense pairing and stuff. Like it could be top 4, maybe. It just depends on how Abbott and his staff want to use Bayreuther. But someone who the Hurricanes can also look at as a defensive depth piece in case like there's injuries and stuff like that. Maybe they got to move Mike Riley into the top, the 6 pairings. And then if they need to look for a 7th defenseman to kind of replace Riley as that guy, if Riley has to go in and play some games, I would not be surprised if Gavin Bayreuther is that first guy to be called up for the Hurricanes from Chicago. So Bayreuther is going to be probably one of those guys that's going to see time in the AHL, but in case, injuries and stuff happen, knock on wood, it doesn't happen. But if there is that, hey, we got to play Mike Riley, we need a guy to come up from Chicago, be our 7th defenseman, Bayreuther would be that guy. Because like I said, he's got a lot of time down there in the AHL that is 238 games, but he does have 122 NHL games as well. So he does bring some of that experience of being able to play down there, but also play up in the NHL as well. So that's kind of what you're looking at with Bayreuther being that extra piece. So like I said, it's a lot of these moves that, yes, on paper, it doesn't really wow a lot of people, but these are the necessary moves to make sure your team is good depth-wise. And in case anything happens, hey, you got guys who have got the experience, can go out there and fill those roles that pretty much the Hurricanes need right now in terms of anything that happens in terms of the forwards, the defense, and stuff like that. It's like the same thing with the goaltending situation where you look at, you trade for Caden Primo for a 7th rounder in 2026 because you need a 3rd goalie to bring in. And even with Amir Miftakov bringing him over from Russia, that's a 4th goalie that you need. So this is kind of what, when you look at when you're bringing a guy like Gavin Bayreuther, is a good depth piece. It's going to help the American League, but also in the NHL as well in case of a break glass in case of emergency type of situation. So those are the other 2 kind of, I would say, significant moves of the Hurricanes and me that maybe are more of the organizational depth help than anything else. So that being said, there is one more thing that has happened recently, more so on the Chicago Wolves side of things getting done, but it was something that was very cool to have that the Hurricanes needed to, be like, hey, we have one of our own coming back home and playing for the organization at least. So stick around. We'll talk about Tyler Weiss here in a second on a Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Welcome to segment 3 of Locked on Hurricanes, your team every day. So we talk about Brind'Amour, Fenore, Gunler, and Bayreuther, but now let's talk about Tyler Weiss, who is coming back to the Raleigh area, or at least with the organization, as he signed a deal with the Chicago Wolves. Now, mostly his contract is going to be with the Chicago Wolves, where it's a two-way deal, but it's a two-way AHL ECHL contract. So it's not one of those ones where it's a two-way with the Canes where it's like NHL or the AHL level. But this is kind of where this is more of that, hey, this is a really cool situation because the fact that now you get a guy who's from the area is coming back to the organization some way, even if it's with a contract that's mainly for the Chicago Wolves and or going to be playing with the Greensboro Gargoyles right there in Greensboro. So, and it really shows how awesome this is for the growth of hockey in North Carolina, or just the Carolinas in general, is because of the fact that you're bringing Tyler Weiss back, who was born actually in Raleigh, and he was a former junior Hurricane going into now his third professional season. Now, his first 2 years of his career was spent in the ECHL, mainly with the Newfoundland Growlers, who are unfortunately no longer a team. And then, of course, you got the South Carolina Stingrays, where he has totaled 95 points in 119 ECHL games. That's pretty solid for a guy who's mainly played in the ECHL level, but has done a pretty good job, all to consider. We have 95 points in 119 games spanned over 2 seasons with Newfoundland and also the South Carolina Stingrays. The thing that's really cool too is the fact that the reason why he got into hockey was because of the Canes winning the 2006 Stanley Cup, which, I mean, when you have a team that wins a cup, people get excited. Maybe they want to play it as well. And the thing with Weiss is he will be looking to make his AHL debut this upcoming season with the Wolves. So while that's the thing with his contract, is the fact that it's a two-way AHL, ECHL, he's really going to be trying to take that next step to his game. And for me, if you look at a guy who's got 95 points in 119 ECHL games, I think that kind of almost gives you a good shot of making these AHL, because if you have, like, if his numbers were maybe like in the 40-50 range with that many games played, I could see where, okay, maybe it might be a tough long shot for him to make it unless he has a really, great camp. I think with where his point total is, I think Weiss has a really good shot of making the AHL club this upcoming season. Of course, it depends on how, it plays out for him, but I'm really excited to see what he can do coming into the fold with the Wolves. Now, other guys that have been, signed to AHL contracts with the Wolves are Danny Gore, Evan Verling, Blink Benotti, and of course Yannick Turcotte is coming back. And those are just contracts that are signed by the Wolves themselves. These aren't ones that are under contract with the Canes. Like I said, those guys are Bendica, Fenore, Himosami, Yaska, Tyson Jost, Ruslan Kaisev. We're also talking about Legault, Montgomery, Nadeau, Nystrom, and then Robidas, Slavin, Trikasov, and Unger Sorm. So that's kind of where you look at in terms of AHL contracts, where you have your guys who have played at least a game with the Chicago Wolves, but are under technically Hurricanes contracts of control. You heard that long list. Those are the guys that the Hurricanes can bring up because that's the contracts they have through the team. And then, of course, they go to the AHL to play for the Wolves, while you got Gore, Verling, Benotti, and Turcotte are just straight up Wolf signings by the AHL club itself. And that's what also Tyler Weiss is. So while it's great to have a Raleigh native back, a lot of things will have him behind the scenes to get his contract if he is able to make it up. But this is mainly going to be this is a guy who's hopefully going to try and make it in his third pro season to make that jump from the just playing in ECHL games to playing in the AHL games for the Chicago Wolves. So could we possibly see Weiss down there in Greensboro with the Gargoyles? Probably. I wouldn't be surprised if he is down there. But when you hear, like I said, you're bringing in a guy who is a really good forward who's done a lot of good stuff. And I think the fact, too, is where you look at in terms of his point totals and in the overall games he's played, and you look at the current forward core of guys, I mean, technically, even with the signings of Gore, Verling, Benoni, and Turcotte, those are 4 extra guys. Now you're adding Weiss, who's bringing you a 5th. You are looking at a team that has, even with Ryan Suzuki not signed, you adding those 5 guys, that still gives Weiss a possible opportunity to make this roster, even while you do have 2 centers and a lot of wingers. I think there's still a lot of potential there for Weiss to make the forward group. Of course, he's really going to have to show out, which I think he will, but it does give some possible chances that he could make, like I said, he could make this AHL roster coming up for Chicago Wolves. Of course, that's not even talking about all the other guys that are within the organization, or maybe the Wolves are going to sign. But it's really cool for the fact that you got a Raleigh native coming to play for the organization, even if it's a AHL, ECHL two-way deal in that aspect. It goes to show how important the growth of hockey has been in North Carolina and in the Carolinas in general, maybe in North Carolina, but mainly in North Carolina. Just based on the fact that the Hurricanes won the Cup in 2006, and then the fact of all their success over the last 7 seasons under Brind'Amour as head coach, this team, like you see that, like the, first skate lessons, and you got the junior canes and all that stuff too, which is really cool because you got the guy, the boys and the girls and all that stuff on those side of things, and all the U team, the under 16s, 18s, and all that stuff, and you see just the overall growth that even with the fact that you got Shane Wills kind of looking over all of that in terms of the junior Hurricanes and even the USHL Canes and all that stuff too. It's very exciting to see the growth of hockey kind of being built in the way that it's North Carolina is just not a state where it's like, okay, no one really cares, to now it's like, okay, now we're getting actual players that are making like, U18 teams in the women's worlds, or U18 women's championships and stuff like that. And then of course you got players like Skyler Brind'Amour, who's playing for the organization for a second year, and you got Tyler Weiss coming back to play for the organization and possibly could be playing games in Greensboro for the Gargoyles. I think that's really cool too, for the fact that now you're bringing an ECHL club to Greensboro, right close to Raleigh. Yeah, you have the Charlotte Checkers, but now you have 2 footprints of the Canes in Upper North Carolina, where you got the Hurricanes in Raleigh. Now you got the Gargoyles in Greensboro, and now you're adding a Raleigh native into the fold of that, whether it's either, like I said, in the ECHL or playing for Chicago in the American League. That's another notch in the belt for the Hurricanes, the fact of the culture, of the hockey culture they've been building over the last 26, 27, 28 years, and now you're bringing in players that are from the area that, are able to come and sign for the organization, or at least an affiliate in some effect. So it's really cool to see Weiss kind of back in the fold with the Hurricanes. That being said, like I said, it's not a lot of huge, like, oh, these are needle-moving moves, but, it's a good thing to kind of, while we want to focus on the NHL side, we also want to see how the Chicago Wolves are going to do in terms of the fact of guys that are under the Hurricanes roster control with their 1-year, 2-way deals, or even guys who are from the area are going to be hopefully making some impacts within the organization in some way with an affiliate or with the team itself. So really cool to see with all of that. So that is another week in the books of free agency, and hopefully we'll see maybe some more moves coming up over the next few weeks as we are now getting closer and closer and closer to all of that. And I know we were supposed to do a schedule episode on this Friday edition, but we're actually going to save that for the Monday show because there's a lot of extra stuff I want to dive into as well. So make sure to stick around for the Monday show, because we will definitely be talking a lot of the schedule stuff. But guys, until then, this has been a Friday edition of Locked on Hurricanes. Making your first listen. Your second one, up a Locked on podcast where there is no walk. Bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter the most with the local coverage you love from Locked On. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to keep up with me, I'm at OneTrueZach on X. The podcast is LO_Hurricanes. I'm also on Blue Sky at TheZachary Martin, where you can click the link trees in my bios. You'll find all of my written content at thehockeywriters.com. If you want to check out my other podcast, it's the Searchcast on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. For Locked On Hurricanes, we're on Spotify, Google, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever to listen to your podcast. Make sure to leave a 5-star rating and review because I might just read it on the show. For YouTube, it's Locked On Hurricanes. Make sure to subscribe, hit the bell notifications so miss the show, hit the thumbs up to let me know if you like the show as well. Share with all our Canucks to become everydayers just like you. But hope everyone enjoyed the Friday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Enjoy your Friday and enjoy your weekend. And until next time, as always, let's go Canes.